Hello and welcome to Access Chat. Today we're joined by Ali Ingersoll. Ali, we're delighted to have you. Ali is a day trader, disability strategy consultant, Miss Wheelchair North Carolina 2022. She's also a writer, blogger, editor, and public speaker. And you started your advocacy mission, if I'm right, after being repeatedly denied medical necessities. And you spent the last years since becoming a C6 quadriplegic and full-time wheelchair user, advocating for yourself and for others. So Ali, welcome to Access Chat. It's great to have you with us, and tell us more about your story and your passion and what you do.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and it's wonderful to be here. Yes, so I have a very interesting background for my disability career. I spent my life before my accident, growing up around the world, traveling, experiencing different cultures, living in China. And when I was 27, I was living in the Bahamas at my home at the time, and I was learning to become a technical analysis day trader with a specific type of methodology. And when I finished my 12,000 page course in self study, I took a shallow water dive in celebration. And unfortunately, I just hit sand and became a C6 quadriplegic, paralyzed from the chest down with limited upper body mobility. And for many years, I continued to day trade. And I went through medical challenges that I couldn't even care to recount. I've lost count how many surgeries. And I ended up in China after my surgery, and I'd spent many years in my teens and 20s there undergoing a spinal surgery and a rehab program for several years. And I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina in 2015, and I started to really get involved in the advocacy world, but for myself, fighting health insurance companies that kept denying me medically necessary equipment I needed to not only survive in life, but to thrive. And so I taught myself how to write letters of medical necessity and fight the insurance companies, the little guy, backed up by peer-reviewed journal articles, and started to get involved with online Facebook groups of spinal cord injury folks. And I realized there was such a demand for figuring out how to navigate the health insurance process. So it became a national mission of mine. And then fast forward, I started partnering with national organizations, individuals, creating a website called thecorkyquad.com and writing about my journey. And it morphed into this beautiful mission of not only health insurance, but normalizing really uncomfortable topics in disability, ones that needed awareness and education, and through the lens of a dark humor, actually, because life is challenging. Disability doesn't discriminate. Any one of us can join this club for any reason. So while I fight and I work hard and I do a lot of disability strategy consulting for different organizations, my core mission in life, I would say, is promoting and teaching self-advocacy. It's really important. You have to be pleasantly persistent. It's a full-time job in and of itself, sometimes just to survive. I hate that. That's the way the system works in most systems. But one also needs to take pause and realize that we are in the United States in a first world country. So it's important to fight for change and advocate, but also realizing that we have a system that we can do that in, unlike in many third world countries.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. You talked about being pleasantly persistent, which I think is really interesting, because I think that this is it's a challenge, because I can totally understand how many of the people in our community get to the point where they no longer wish to be pleasant, because their persistence has and the system has ground them down. But we've got to remember that we're not dealing with the same person every time. So whilst we might have been dealing with the system and feel systemically oppressed, we're still relating to individuals. So again, I think that some, not to say restraint, because we have to be able to advocate clearly and powerfully, but the doing it pleasantly, as you say, without being too aggressive and combative, but maintaining that persistence and being able to not stop, not give up, and to really to not take no for an answer, while still doing it in a respectful way, is really key to actually moving the dial forwards on this. And I wish that it weren't so, and that we didn't have to constantly do this, but we do. And also the second point, I think, is you mentioned that the US is a first world country, but it is a first world country which is unique in that it doesn't have universal healthcare.
Correct. Absolutely. And my dad brought me up with a saying. He said, no is a starting negotiation point, Allie. And, when being pleasantly persistent, I think one key strategy I use, and it's challenging from the human condition to do that. But when you are on the phone with an insurance company, for example, and you are fighting and you keep getting 10 different people, it's very easy to get frustrated with the next person you speak with because you think they're all in cohorts together and they're speaking with one another. But oftentimes they're independent of one another. So treating a person independently and not bringing those past frustrations onto the new person you're speaking with is critically important. Just as with caregiving, being a quadriplegic, I have full-time care. I have had horrible things done to me, criminal things done to me. But when a new person comes to my home, making sure to treat them the respect and not carry on that to the next person. And I think, a lot of people do get frustrated. And I might be genetically wired. I'm not quite sure. But I go outside and I meditate. And then I make sure that on the weekends, I go out and I live life and I have adventures and I do things. So when I come back to my command center, which is my accessible computer screen, I can start out fresh.
Excellent. Deborah, I know you had a question.
Well, I'm just so impressed with Allie. And you know what, Allie, I will say that what you just said, be sure not to put it on the next person. I'm guilty of doing that. I'm unfortunately guilty of that. And I have gotten so frustrated by the time I get to the next person, I'm being really hateful to them and they don't appreciate it. And then I feel horrible because I don't want to be. So that is just such beautiful advice. I also like the advice that you were talking about where you're really grounding the arguments in peer reviewed journal articles, because you can tell them why you need it and hope they're empathetic and compassionate, but that helps to do your homework and talk to them. So I think it's very important. And I also I wonder how, because I agree with Neil, it's embarrassing that we don't have universal coverage here in the United States. It's terrible what we do to people in the United States and a developed country. But I wonder, Neil, how does this work in universal, insurance coverage like Canada or the UK or something? Because are they making sure that people like Allie are really getting what she needs? And is there any place? I mean, I just would wonder.
Nowhere's perfect.
Right.
So we have healthcare that's free at the point of delivery. We do pay for it, obviously. We pay for it in our taxes, and not every treatment is available.
Right.
So we have a regulatory body in the UK called NICE. It's the National Institute for Clinical and Health Excellence. We don't pronounce the H. Which is very French, but they decide which treatments the National Health Service is able to offer to the public. So there may be treatments that have been developed in the US, for example, that aren't available in the UK under that universal cover. Right. So then you would still have to advocate, or there may be constraints as to who's allowed it. So it's not to say that we're perfect. We're not, and there is only so much money to go round in funding health treatments. So there is a rationale behind having a body like this to decide what's applicable and what's not. But there is still a need, even in a universally funded system, to be able to advocate and to be able to put your point across and to do your research and be informed.
Right.
Well, that's a really interesting point because it is a double-edged sword in that I have a lot of good friends who are in wheelchairs in England, and they run into the issues. They said, yes, your healthcare system in the United States, it's more expensive than ours. However, when you want to see a specialist doctor, we have more availability and accessibility to see who we want, how we want to see them, versus sometimes waiting months for an appointment for a treatment that may not be approved yet. So there's pros and cons to each, absolutely. And
And
one important point you said, Debra, is I tried the emotional route with health insurance companies years ago. It doesn't work. They want to know the clinical rationale. Is it going to reduce a pressure sore? Is it going to prevent osteoporosis? And if you can make that argument, then you have a higher chance of success.
And I also just would wonder, just picking on NICE with no H, do they have someone like Allie on there that's making these decisions? Because I get you're putting medical personnel there and scientists on there, but are you actually putting talented, qualified, amazing people like Allie on there so that we can make the right decisions? And I would assume not only in England, but I mean, in the UK, but also in the United States, no, we're not doing that. So people are making decisions about our lives that have never had these lived experiences. So I think that's another reason why I think Allie's work is so important. So I just, that's one of the things she does, but I just am really impressed with how she has taken her life and realized so many other people need this type of help as well. So
No, no. If you allow me, something that we have observed over the years is that the advocacy coming from individuals is much stronger in the United States, in Canada, or in United Kingdom, while in other countries, other people take care of that on behalf of people with certain disabilities. Or sometimes organizations do that, and sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't work, because the people who have the need are not actually being listened. So I think that, of course, we have universal healthcare in Portugal and in Ireland, but in terms of individual advocacy is not as strong. So people are not as visible as they are in other countries.
Great point. Great point. And that's why we need Allie's voice, and the Allies of the world's voice is really heard at like the World Health Organization level, at the top of the UN, only because as we're breaking apart our world right now, why don't we rebuild it so that everybody can be included, which I think is powerful.
And that speaks to people in the diversity, equity, inclusion divisions and corporations. How many of them have disabilities, right? You always hear women, people of color, LGBTQ, but disabilities getting left out of the conversation altogether, even in the simple mission statements of their diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes. Yeah, I think it was interesting. I was on Twitter, no surprise, the other day. And I saw a tweet from a friend of ours, Andrew Hayward, who set up the Twitter Able Employee Resource Group, commenting to Parag, who's the CEO of Twitter, and Elon Musk, who is just joining the board of Twitter, having bought a 9% share. That can we have better disability representation on the board of Twitter? The thing is, now they've got at least one neurodivergent person on their board, and they also have someone with physical disabilities on their board. However, it hasn't to this point really changed their policies. It'll be interesting to see whether or not they change their policies at all, because the person with the physical disabilities doesn't really consider accessibility, and Elon Musk is Elon Musk, and probably doesn't consider his autism to be a disability, rather to be an advantage. So whether the existence of disabled people in the makeup of boards solves the problem, I think there needs to be sort of actual clear roles in boards for this, like you have clear roles for other representative groups. So for example, in the company that Antonio and I work for, we have employee shareholder representatives as board members. So it's possible to create a structure where there is this proper inclusion and a proper outlook for it, because actually, amongst the disability community, there's a huge amount of internalized ableism. Just because you're disabled doesn't mean that you actually understand the rest of the community or even have empathy for it, because you may actually dislike that part of yourself or be in total denial.
And there's also a large, what I'm seeing is I'm now working in the disability community quite a lot. I was stuck in the mobility impairment for so long, and I'm now working with people that are blind, low vision, hard of hearing, neurodiverse. And there are so many things that I know. I didn't know what I didn't know. I mean, case in point, I was making a document for a man who was low vision, and I realized I didn't know how to make a Word document accessible because I didn't have a need before, right? So there's a lot of segmentation within the disability community too that we need to fix that before. How can we expect corporations and organizations to create these policies if we're not even aware of what the other one is up to?
Yeah, and I'm not trying to criticize the board member at Twitter. She acquired a disability as part of an accident, going rallying in the Paris-Dakar, I think it was, and spent a long time in hospital and rehabilitation, but probably doesn't consider herself to be disabled even.
No,
So,
but
yeah.
for example, we have situations in Europe where we had ministers and secretaries of state with disability responsible for this disability agenda, and that hasn't made any difference.
Right.
You know, because in fact, sometimes they respond to the prime minister, they respond to the minister of finance, and they let themselves, let go in all the politics, and nothing really happens.
Yeah, it's discouraging. I also think that I know that when I first met Allie, I was blown away with who she is and everything that she's doing. I was just really blown away by her and her brilliance, just everything that she is. And she was talking to me at the time about, wanting to get more involved in the DEI and, working with corporations and helping with that. And what I was worried about, and I told her this, was that corporations weren't going to see her. They weren't really going to see her. What they were going to do, which I'm sorry, I see this all the time. And I will tell you, Neil, except with Atos, except with your team, I don't know why you're doing it so right and thinking about this in a much different way. But I was worried that Allie would get put in because what we do in the United States is we do DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we don't really do it. And we don't really include people, and we don't let them have any kind of say or authority or budget or influence. And I was just really afraid it might crush her spirit. Nothing's going to crush her spirit, but I actually discouraged her from applying for jobs with large corporations, because what I keep seeing is these corporations, they might put in that little token, role, but then they don't really allow the people to be who they are. And that really bothers me. I know, Antonio, you wanted to come in.
No, it's true. Unless there's a strong sponsorship from the board and from the CEO, I don't think nothing will ever happen. And we can go back 20 years and learn even from the diversity agenda, and we realize nothing really changed because only a few CEOs were really committed with it.
Right. I agree. And what do you think, Allie? Because that's what I was worried about, just because she's so brilliant. She's so brilliant.
I think a lot of it comes down to not only you have to have first commitment from the CEOs and top down, of course. And I think a lot of that comes with creating a very robust D&I roadmap strategy. And a lot of corporations aren't capable of creating that themselves. So I think they need outside consultants to help them with that. But then it's a multi-pronged approach, having an extremely strong employee resource group who are going to take very specific actionable steps to a CEO and the top management, the C-suite leaders, who can actually affect that change. And what you alluded to earlier, Deborah, is a budget, right? So that budgetary challenges, they just throw, here's a little bit of money, do what you can with this, but the DEI departments and the HR, they don't speak with one another. I mean, there was one corporation and I wrote them a list of questions and they were interested in hiring me. And from an accessibility, I said, I can be just as efficient and effective that I work from home, but here's my accessibility requirements. And the HR people, they had no idea how to answer my questions.
No.
And I think that is a challenge, even in organizations that have accessibility functions is that, especially in multinationals, that getting them outside of the silos and embedding that across the entirety of the organization and having inclusive practice is a long-term thing. It's a multi-year strategy. It's not a sort of something that you can sort of press a button and it's done, and it's something that you need to continuously iterate.
But you know where that
So,
starts from fear, right? People are scared. They don't know questions or how to offend. So a lot of that comes from people like me with a disability being willing to talk about it, educate. Okay, here is A through B. Just from if I need to use my own laptop with has my software,
yeah.
let's talk about security protocols. So that comes from, I think a lot of people are afraid to approach us with disabilities because they don't want to offend us, but we need to be open and have those honest conversations with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the employee resource groups or networks, depending on where you are in the world. And
Yes.
we have one in our organization which we call ADAPT. I can't claim to have coined the name. That was down to a brilliant lady called Sarah Brooks, named instead of ability or some of the other names. We chose ADAPT because people with disabilities are constantly having to adapt to our circumstances and our environment. And at the same time, the purpose of the network was to help the company change, act as a catalyst. And whilst I run the policy and the expert centers for the organization, I'm only a sponsor for for ADAPT because they have their own voice and they're there. They're not run by HR. There is some funding from HR, but they're not run by HR. They're there to hold us to account, to advocate within the organization. Now, we may not always agree, but it's important to have that authentic voice and for it not to be restricted in them having that voice. So it's real. We may not always have exactly what they want, but they can keep us honest. And so we have this dialogue. We do have exec sponsors as well, and some of the exec sponsors identify as having disabilities, which is great because again, then you have role models. And we have, senior role models, SVPs within the organization that are sponsors that identify. And then when you're talking about the whole identity and safe to self-identify piece, we do the work as the IT partner for the Olympics and Paralympics, and they started the We the 15 movement. And we used this within our own organization because of our ties to start bringing people to conversations to adapt. So we've been running a little campaign called 15 Seconds of Fame, where we get the members and literally they talk for 15 seconds about why they identify with disability. Now, it might be that they are an ally, or they may talk about their own disability and why they're supporting ADAPT in, and We the 15. And so that's sort of created this interest because of the work that we're doing around sport and it being one of our clients. And then people are actually seeing their colleagues talking about it openly for the first time, and this is across lots and lots of different countries. So we've got people from India, South America, Germany, France, Spain, UK, Portugal, etc. So it's running across the gamut, and I think that's important that people can see that we're all part.
Well, that's such a key linchpin, right? Because historically, for so long, and even today, disability has been synonymous with disadvantage and weakness, right? And so many of us with disabilities are very, we have a lot of ingenuity. We stay at jobs longer. We work harder. We just even just the act of our lived disability experiences, so many people I know are incredible at time management and scheduling and planning every moment of their life because I spend 3 or 4 hours a day just on my caregiving my life before I even get to my day. I wake up at 5 in the morning, get to my computer screens at 8. I've already had 3 hours just to survive, and I haven't even started my work yet.
Yeah. I was laughing when you said we're so good at time management. As an ADHD, that's my Achilles heel, right?
Yeah, I have the opposite. I plan everything like military time in my life.
Yeah.
But it's because of caregiving, which is another issue that Allie and I are taking on. Very proud that Allie and Neil are part of the Billion Strong board, which we haven't announced yet because, you know, what happened with my husband, and Caroline Casey too, which is so important. But you know, how do we do this? How do we take our community and come together with pride and tell these 500 corporations, for example, that no, we are here. We have allies, but where are the allies? And where are the Neils? And where are the Debras that are willing to disclose? But I still believe that a huge issue that we have is that we are including neurodiverse people like Neil and myself. We might not know how to accommodate them so we can be our best, but we are not including people like Allie. We are not, because it's too hard, it's too much trouble, I don't understand. And so I know this is unfair to you, Allie, what I'm about to do to you, but if you had a magic wand that you could, really change things, and you were talking to these 500 corporations, including Atos. Atos is here, and Atos really works a lot with Siemens, so they represent a lot of these big brands that they honestly do care. They do care about us, but I just am worried about our community not wanting to identify our lived experience with pride. And also, I still contend that the people that are being left out are the people with what we consider more severe disabilities. So I was just wanted to throw that to you unfairly, Allie. Sorry.
No, I think that's true. So I don't do what I do for money. However, I need to survive. We all need to survive. So especially in the United States, many of us with severe physical disabilities who need caregiving round the clock, for example, many of people are on Medicare and Medicaid, and they can only make about $1,100 a month. Otherwise, their benefits are taken away. Otherwise, they need to make 100 grand plus, maybe 80 grand plus at least, because they have to pay for their health insurance, and they have to pay for full-time caregivers out of pocket. I don't qualify for Medicaid. I decided to get married, and therefore I don't qualify, and I make too much money for Medicare, SSDI. And so, a huge challenge is for these corporations that want us, they may have to pay more for us, and because we need to make a living. I mean, plain and simple. And that's a huge challenge I think about all the time, where I do consulting, I do day trading, and there are days when the pain is just overwhelming. I suffer from terrible nerve pain, but I get up, I suck it up, and I work because I don't have that option not to work. And that can be really, really challenging.
Wow.
You reminded me of one of the other things that always makes me raise eyebrows when I hear about how the structure of the system is in the US. It's like, I got married, so now I'm disqualified.
Right.
I had this conversation the other day.
You can have benefits, or you can get married. You can have healthcare, or you can marry the person you love, or you can just that just seems inhumane.
You know what's inhumane as well? If you're on Medicare or Medicaid, for example, oftentimes on Medicare, they will tell you how many catheters you can use a month based on a doctor's prescription. You are only allowed a certain amount of catheters per month. The government is telling you how many times you can go pee in a day. I have friends that have to pee a lot because they want to drink water and stay healthy, and they have to reuse their catheters and sterilize them at home. This is a first world country. This is Medicare. I mean, it is maddening and inhumane, as you mentioned.
Yes, that's a really good word. And not evolved. And that's why I remember when Allie was talking to a corporation that wanted her, and I was just starting, and I'm just her friend, but she was making some comments to me about what they were saying, and I was like, I was afraid for her. I said, I'm just so afraid, Allie, they're not going to see you. They might hire you in as a token, but it's like, what a waste. What a waste to do that. What a waste to society to do that. These corporate brands, they need to find the Allies. They need to find the Neils. They need to find the people that really can make a difference. If you don't like the way the world works, what are you doing to change it? And that's one thing that I just love about Allie's work. I just love it. And Allie, can I also maybe shift a little bit in that I know I'm very proud of you that you won Miss North Carolina wheelchair.
Yes.
And of course, we're going to immediately, and because you did get a crown, I love crowns, sorry. But it isn't a beauty pageant per se. And I was just wondering if maybe you could talk about why did you even decide to go to that path, and what does that mean?
I was approached to run. It's an advocacy pageant. And there's two different competitions nationally, Miss Wheelchair America and Miss Wheelchair USA. For Miss Wheelchair America, you have to win your specific state first. And I was asked to run, and my platform was health insurance advocacy. So teaching people how to navigate the intricacies of the health insurance appeal system, but specifically a lot of tips and tricks that I have learned the really hard way. So that's what I won on, but I'm using that to propel forward for policy change on equipment that insurance companies don't find medically necessary. For example, adaptive exercise equipment. So it's a non-covered benefit item, very briefly. Of course, anything exercise equipment, insurance isn't going to approve a treadmill for an able-bodied person who can walk outside, but they're not differentiating what an adaptive piece of equipment is that's going to reduce comorbidities and reduce secondary complications and diabetes. So it's an issue of health equity versus health equality, right? One size doesn't fit all. This is not news. This has been around for a while, but insurance companies, it's like moving the dial. I was working with the Blue Cross and Blue Shield North Carolina policy directors directly after I won Miss Wheelchair North Carolina. They wrote me a beautiful, I'm not going to swear on Twitter, but a beautiful blow-off letter stating that we care about your healthcare and diversity, including yada, yada, yada. So I'm now introducing legislation in May. I'm sure it will fail, but I will keep going on that. And then in nationals in August, I'm competing. It's going to be on health insurance advocacy, trying to navigate. I'm trying to change the system, but presently, if you're in a broken system, how do you navigate within that broken system to get what you need? It's unfair, it's unjust, but until we see that systemic change, we have to figure out how to navigate within it.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree on your two-pronged approach. Just one comment back to you saying, well, they wouldn't pay for stuff to keep you healthy if you're able-bodied. There is a movement, certainly in the UK and in other places, to actually start doing this kind of preventative prescriptions. So they are prescribing swimming. They
It's a
are
lot cheaper.
prescribing.
I was going to save so much more money.
It's a huge amount of money for
Blue Cross
the
spent
country.
$60,000 on my butt for a pressure sore because they did not provide me with the right mattress. That would have cost $3,000. I eventually won it, but after spending an entire year in bed with a pressure sore on my tailbone down to my bone and multiple surgeries. It's outrageous.
Yeah. So there has been this recognition that it's actually cost effective to take a preventative medicine approach. So I hope that makes its way across the Atlantic at some point. It's still not fully mainstream here yet, but it is something that they're encouraging doctors to prescribe these alternative things. So I hope that happens.
But what has changed about, right? So I may work on this adaptive exercise equipment for a year or 10 years.
Yeah.
Even if I fail, if what I'm doing and advertising on social media and my blog and or Twitter, if I can inspire one person to take on that mission, right? People think, what is one person going to do, right? It's a cliche, but one person can do a lot, even if it ignites, frustration in somebody else to carry it on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, within large and complex systems, whether that be a healthcare system or a large corporation, you have to take that two-pronged approach of looking to make systemic change and figuring out what you can do within the constraints of the system that you're living in right now.
Precisely.
So yeah, that makes total sense to me. And yes, one person can make a difference. I think that, I started within our organization. I was the only person doing accessibility. We've got 30 full-time. Plus we've got another 100 people doing it as part of their roles within the organization. It will continue to grow, but it does take time. And meanwhile, you have to sort of find your way around the roadblocks and navigate those systems and be creative. And you know what? We're living in uncertain times. Companies can benefit from the creativity that people with disabilities are going to bring to their organization.
I live by a quote every morning when I wake up by Winston Churchill. The definition of success is moving from failure to failure without lack of enthusiasm. That either makes me laugh or cry on some mornings, but it keeps me going nonetheless.
Brilliant. Yes. Excellent. So, Ali, it's been a real pleasure to have you on. I'm really looking forward to you joining us on Twitter. And I need to also thank my clear text for keeping us captioned and accessible. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.